Okay, hey guys, we were on the chapter of principles of governance, so let's do a recap. Means the ideas, the values, the way of thinking that shape a certain thing. In this case, we are talking about the principles that shape governance in Singapore. Governance means the way or system in which the government runs or manages a country. So, principles of governance as a whole will determine the policy making decisions in Singapore. How the government makes policies in Singapore is being guided by these principles. Okay, there are four big principles of governance that we need to know. The first one is having good leadership. Okay, so having good leadership basically means that we have to choose the right kind of people to form the government to make the right kind of decisions for the country as a whole. So who are these right kind of people? These people should have good qualities. Okay, good qualities such as number one, they should have good moral character, such as being honest and incorruptible. Incorruptible means that they are not corrupted. The leaders should not be corrupted. Corrupted means that leaders, if a leader is corrupted, it means that the leader will accept bribes, accept gifts, okay, from people, and they will try to benefit this group of people at the expense of the others in the country. And that's not what we want. So our leaders should be honest as well as not corrupted. Okay, secondly, they should have the moral courage to do what is right and not what is popular with the people. Okay, so the government, the leaders should not just be people pleasers. They should not just make decisions that will please the people, but which do not benefit the country as a whole. And for that, we will talk about the example of ERP later on. Okay, lastly, leaders should also be capable to make the right decisions for the country. Okay, and by making the right decisions for the country, we are talking about leaders being able to meet the needs and interests of the people. Okay, so example of moral courage is the ERP. Okay, so moral courage, recall, it is about having the courage to do what is right and not what is popular and not what pleases the people. Okay, in this case, the ERP is actually something that the people are unhappy about, but the government still went ahead, okay, to install the ERP gantries on certain roads in Singapore. Okay, so why are the motorists and drivers unhappy about the ERP? It is because when they pass through these roads with the ERP gantries installed, they have to pay for the use of these roads. Okay, so every vehicle, they have to install these IU, the in-vehicle unit, okay, in dash vehicle unit. So the IU has to be installed. It's a device that has to be installed on every vehicle in Singapore, and they have to insert a cash card into this IU. So basically, when the cars go under this ERP gantry, okay, money will be deducted from the cash card inserted into the IU. Okay, so in this way, this is how the motorists have to pay for the use of these roads with the ERP. That's why people are unhappy because they have to fork out money, okay, in the form of cash card. Okay, they have to top up money into the cash card in order to pay for the ERP charges. So it's an unpopular decision amongst the people in Singapore. But the government still went ahead with this decision of the ERP. Why? Okay, because it is an effort to reduce traffic congestions and traffic jams in Singapore. Okay, why are traffic congestions bad? Okay, if you think about having severe traffic congestions like the ones in Thailand, okay, very severe, it will actually hold up everyone's time. Okay, in the case of people wanting to report to work early in the morning, okay, if people are held up here and there because of traffic congestions, it will mean that the company's work processes cannot flow smoothly. It will disrupt companies' processes, and on the whole, it will actually impact economic growth in Singapore. Okay, when all the companies are held up here and there, their processes cannot flow, there are delays here and there, it will affect production, okay, in Singapore. And on a whole, with production being held up, okay, with the work processes being held up here and there, the economy will definitely be affected. That's why traffic congestions are bad for the country, and the government has to come up with ways to manage traffic flows and reduce traffic congestions. So when people know that they have to pay for the use of these busy roads, okay, for information, these ERPs are not installed on every single road. It is only installed on very busy roads in Singapore. The intention is, okay, when they charge people for the use of these roads, Okay, these drivers and motorists, they might think of alternative ways to avoid the ERP charges, either by coming to work earlier, using these roads right before the operating hours of the ERP. So let's say the ERP begins at 7:30 a.m. They might leave house early to use these roads well before 7:30 a.m. so that they can avoid the ERP charges. And therefore, when a peak hour season comes, okay, there will be fewer vehicles on these roads because some of the vehicles would have already entered the central business district, the CBD area, before the operating hours of the ERP. So it reduces the number of vehicles and therefore reduce traffic congestion. Alternatively, the drivers may decide to take public transport, okay, so that they do not have to pay for the ERP charges, and therefore this will, again, with public transport, let's say a bus carries so many passengers, right? So it actually reduces the number of vehicles on the road, okay? And thirdly, the drivers or the motorists, they may decide to use other alternative roads instead of these busy roads. So it helps to redirect traffic flows to other less busy roads as well, so that it does not congest these particularly busy roads in Singapore, especially those connecting to the central business district area, the CBD area, where the commercial buildings, the offices are located in. Okay, so this is an example of the government having the moral courage to think of the benefits, the welfare of the country as a whole. Okay, despite the ERP being an unpopular decision amongst the people, the government still have to think about the interests of the country as a whole in terms of economic development, not disrupted by traffic congestion. So the government still went ahead with the decision of having the ERP. Okay, next, we can also mention the example of the Scape. Okay, the Scape is actually a space for the youth in Singapore, and this example of Scape illustrates the quality of capable leadership. Okay, just now I talked about the qualities of leadership. Number one, having good moral character, such as being honest and incorruptible. Number two, having the moral courage to do what is right and not what is popular. Number three, having capable leaders who are able to make the right kind of decisions for the country to meet the needs of the people. So the Scape falls under capable leadership, number three, okay, meeting the needs of the people. How so? Okay, back in 2007, when the government wanted to create a space for the youth in Singapore, okay, to showcase their talent, to develop the talents of youth, they did not just go ahead and randomly construct a space for the youth without taking into account the needs and the concerns of the youth. So the government actually involved the youth in Singapore in the development of Scape. Okay, so Scape is located in Orchard Road. Okay, for information. In the planning process of the space to develop a space for the youth in Singapore, the government consulted the youth, okay, by letting the youth submit their ideas to the government for what they want a space for the youth in Singapore to be like. Okay, the youth were also involved in the planning and development of the space throughout the whole process, and therefore here we have the Scape. Okay, so if you're interested in what the Scape is about, you can go to Orchard Road to Scape, okay, and personally experience Scape for yourself. Basically, Scape is a place for the youth in Singapore. It has dining, shopping, the shopping and the dining aspects. They also have music and dance studios to develop these performance kind of interest in the youth, to nurture these talents, these interests in the youth of Singapore. Okay, so basically, why do we talk about the example of Scape? It's because the government meets the needs of the youth in Singapore by involving them in the decision-making process, okay, of coming up with a space for the youth in Singapore, so that it meets the direct needs and the interests of the youth in Singapore. Okay, so the idea of capable leadership meeting the needs of the people. Okay, next we have the principle of anticipating change and staying relevant. So we can break this word or this phrase into different chunks to understand it better. Anticipate has the meaning of expect. You expect something to happen. In this case, when we talk about anticipating change, we are talking about the government expecting future changes or future challenges to arise in Singapore. Okay, and so they prepare for these future changes and future challenges by doing something now. Okay, so it's about the government being forward-looking, planning ahead for future challenges so that we are able to overcome these future challenges right now. Okay, and we are not caught by surprise when things happen in the future. Okay, so it is not uncommon for the government in Singapore to implement policies by thinking ahead, by thinking 10 to 15 years down the road. Okay, what are the future needs of the economy? What are the future challenges of the Singapore economy? And they start to plan for it now and to prepare for these future challenges. So all these encapsulate the idea of anticipating change and staying relevant so that Singapore is able to stay competitive and stay relevant with times. Okay, so an example that we can mention is the integrated resorts, the IRs. We have two integrated resorts in Singapore, one in MBS, Marina Bay Sands, okay, MBS, the other Resort World Sentosa, RWS. So why the example of the integrated resorts? Okay, specifically, the government expects that the tourism sector in Singapore will face more and more challenges in the future because we have many countries around the world developing major tourist attractions in recent years. For example, Hong Kong opened Disneyland. So all these attraction factors will actually pull tourists to other countries um, and not Singapore, because when tourists are attracted by the tourist attraction destinations in other country, they might decide to go to this country instead of coming to Singapore. So we'll lose out in our tourism sector, and losing out is actually very detrimental. It has negative effects on the economy of Singapore because Singapore's economy depends very much on the tourism sector to bring in revenue and national income for Singapore. That's why the government has to prepare for these future challenges in the tourism sector by coming up with new tourist attractions in Singapore, and therefore the government decided to build the IRs, the integrated resorts in Singapore. Okay, so integrated means combine, everything combined into one. So in this case, integrated resorts means the holiday destination. Resort means holiday destination. These resorts, these IRs in Singapore, they house hotels. Okay, they have dining, shopping, they have the casino, entertainment sectors, okay, all in one building. Okay, so integrated into one holiday destination in MBS as well as the RWS. Okay, so this is how the government meets the challenges that Singapore will face in our tourism sector by coming up with tourist attractions like the integrated resorts, okay, to attract tourists to come to Singapore so that we are able to stay competitive in the tourism sector, okay, to benefit our country's economic growth. Okay, and when we talk about the integrated resorts, there's also one important issue. Okay, why? Because the integrated resorts, as mentioned earlier on, they house a casino each. Okay, so before the IRs, we do not have casinos in Singapore. But with the IRs, casinos were incorporated into the IRs as a main attraction, okay, to attract tourists to Singapore. And why the concern about the casinos? It is because with casinos in Singapore, we might experience social problems when Singaporeans become addicted to gambling. They gamble away their life savings. It affects their family, okay, resulting in poverty and suffering. And worst case is when they go and borrow from loan sharks and they end up with huge debts that they cannot pay off. Okay, so all this will cause social problems for Singapore. When people are out of money, they may decide to commit suicide. Okay, they might decide to engage in crimes like robbery just to stay alive, just to have money for themselves. So all this will create social problems for Singapore. So to meet this challenge of social problems as a result of the casinos and the IRs, the government also came up with also set up the National Council of Problem Gambling. Okay, the National Council of Problem Gambling to deal with this social problems as a result of the casinos in Singapore. So this National Council of Problem Gambling actually provides counseling services to counsel these problem gamblers, okay, to turn over a new leaf and to stop engaging in excessive gambling activities in Singapore. Okay, so they provide counseling services for problem gamblers. They also actually oversee the exclusion permits, the application of the exclusion permits. Okay, so basically these exclusion permits is that if you realize that your family member or family members are addicted to gambling, you can ban them from entering the casinos in Singapore. So this exclusion permit, with this application of exclusion permit, you can bar your family members from entering the casino in Singapore so that they do not continue to engage in gambling activities. Okay, so the council actually oversees these exclusion permits, the application of the exclusion permits as well. Okay, so to deal with what kind of challenge? The challenge of social problems as a result of the casinos. Okay, and if you do not want to use the example of the IRs in your essay, you can also talk about the example of the Pearls Center. It is also an example to illustrate anticipating change and staying relevant. Okay, why so? Um, what is this challenge that the government is anticipating in this case? Okay, the challenge that the government is anticipating is with a growing population in Singapore, especially with the influx of foreign immigrants, new immigrants, foreigners into Singapore, our transportation network will have to be improved, okay, to cater for smoother transportation experience, commuting experience for Singaporeans, okay, and also the new immigrants. Okay, because right now we know that our transportation system is heavily burdened by the increasing number of people using it in Singapore, especially with the new immigrants. Okay, we have growing population, so it has resulted in overcrowding in public transport. Okay, and uh, with overcrowding, it will also bring the problem of delays. Okay, why? Because when a train comes, okay, and we have so many people wanting to take the train at any one time, the train is too overcrowded. It cannot take any more passengers. People will have to wait for subsequent trains to come, and so all this will delay and cause very long waiting time for Singaporeans and also the new immigrants in Singapore. Okay, and this will actually cause a lot of unhappiness, disruption to again companies' work processes and so on. Okay, so there's a need to improve on the transportation infrastructure in Singapore, the public transport infrastructure in Singapore. So the Pearl Center, okay, why do we talk about Pearl Center is this? To improve on the public transportation network in Singapore, the government decides to extend and to have more MRT lines. So we know of the Thomson East Coast Line, the brown line that's not yet in operation. Okay, so to build this Thomson East Coast Line to extend the MRT network, um, it is actually going to pass through this area where the Pearls Center is. So the decision was made to demolish the Pearls Center so that we can construct this Thomson East Coast Line. Okay, so the government, by anticipating the problems of a growing population and the need for a more efficient public transport network, has to stay relevant by building more MRT lines, by improving on the public transport system in Singapore, and since the Pearl Center is in the way of the Thomson East Coast Line, the government has to make the decision to demolish the Pearl Center. Okay, despite the unhappiness of the residents and the shop owners who have been staying in the Pearl Center and operating their business in the Pearl Center for many, many years. Of course, they were being compensated financially. Okay, so in this case, we talk about the Pearl Center as an example of how the government anticipates the problems, the challenges of a growing population and a growing need for a more efficient public transport system in Singapore and stay relevant by constructing more MRT lines. Okay, so this is the Thomson East Coast Line. You can take a look at the various stations that will be implemented as a result of the construction of the Thomson East Coast Line. And it is stated to benefit about 500,000 commuters, okay, with the start of this line. Okay, in the initial years, it will benefit about 500,000 commuters every day, and twice that in the long term. Okay, twice the number of commuters will be benefited in the long term with the opening of the Thomson East Coast Line. Okay, because people, there will be lesser overcrowding in other stations when the crowds are redirected to this new line. Okay, and it will provide for a more accessible transportation around Singapore, because now we have various stations, so it links up many places in Singapore. It will improve efficiency, it will improve accessibility of places around Singapore. Okay, the third principle is practicing meritocracy. Okay, practicing meritocracy is a principle of rewarding people. Okay, how we reward people. So meritocracy is on the basis of rewarding people for their hard work and talent as well as their capabilities. And we do not reward based on your race, your religion, or your social background in terms of your income level or the income level of your family. Okay, so we reward people fairly based on their hard work, their effort, and their talent, their capability. Okay, and we do not take their race, religion, or social background into account. So when we have this fair system of rewarding people, people are encouraged to work hard. Okay, so take the example of in school. Okay, let's say you are the top 10% of your cohort at the end of the year. Okay, if you are the top 10% of the cohort, you will get this EduSave Scholarship Award. Okay, this EduSave Scholarship Award is given to the top 10% of every cohort, Sec 1, Sec 2, Sec 3, Sec 4, Sec 5, okay, for instance. Okay, the top 10% of the students, okay, in terms of academic achievements, they will get this EduSave Scholarship Award in the form of a certificate, okay, to recognize your academic achievement as well as a cash award. So the EduSave Scholarship Award will give $500 check, okay, to the recipients. Okay, and the top 25% of the school cohort will get the EduSave Merit Bursary Award and a $250 cash reward in the form of a check. Okay, so this is how Singapore rewards students who perform well academically, okay, and despite and regardless of which race or which religion, or whether you are poor or you are very rich. In the case of EduSave Merit Bursary, in the top 25% one, um, there is a certain income threshold. So if you are very rich, okay, you have exceeded the income levels, you will not be able to get the merit bursary. But the EduSave scholarship is awarded, the top 10% one is awarded regardless of how rich or how poor you are. Okay. So in this case, it rewards people regardless of their race, their religion. Okay, and therefore students are encouraged to work hard because they will be rewarded duly. Okay, um, so let's say in the case of school exams, okay, if the teacher rewards marks based on your race, let's say you are supposed to score 100 for this particular test because you have answered everything correctly. But because you are from a particular race, the teacher decides to deduct 60 marks from you and end up you only get 40 marks, okay, when actually you should deserve 100 marks in the first place. So how will you feel then if your teacher rewards marks in this manner? You will feel that it is very unfair, you will feel unhappy. And next time round, you might not be motivated to work hard anymore because you will think, no matter how hard I work, I will still be deducted marks because of my race. So in this case, you will feel discouraged to work hard. You don't want to work hard. And this will actually impede or hinder talent development, okay, in Singapore, because when you know that you belong to a particular race or religion, or you come from a certain family background, you will not be rewarded fairly. So why is there a need for me to work hard, correct? Okay, so that's why Singapore practices meritocracy to ensure that regardless of your background, if you are able to display your talent, your capability, you are able to put in effort, okay, you will be rewarded fairly. So that's why it is not very uncommon for us to hear stories about children of taxi drivers or children whose parents work in hawker centers to be able to escape the poverty cycle and able to earn higher incomes. How come? Because they are able to excel in school, they are able to get into a good university, eventually they are able to secure a good job for themselves and earn higher incomes, and that's why they can escape the poverty cycle. Okay, so this is all possible because of the principle of meritocracy, which is a system of a fair reward, rewarding people fairly based on their capability, their hard work, their talent, and not because of their background. Okay. So this is an example of a country that does not practice meritocracy, okay, where there's corruption in education. If you see the case study here, there is this parent in this family who had to pull together $4,000 just to bribe the school and get the son admitted into the school. Okay, so we don't see this in Singapore where you have to bribe the principal, for instance, to get into the school of your choice. Okay, you usually enter the school of your choice through your academic results, okay, and not through a bribing. So with this kind of system in place, there's corruption in education. It is actually very unfair, okay, for the people who are poor, who have low income, because they are not able to pull together this sum of money. And despite the fact that they may be as equally talented or even more talented than the rich in the society, they still don't get a fair chance in education. Okay, so this is very worrying when countries do not practice meritocracy, and it hinders the capability, the development of people, because people sort of their fates are already sealed. They have no chance to break out of the poverty cycle when corruption is very widespread in the country. There's no meritocracy. You are not guaranteed success by just working hard, by just having the talent. Okay, people are looking out for more things like money. Do you have the money, okay, to be successful? If you don't, okay, even if you are hardworking, even if you are talented, even if you are capable, you will still not be rewarded. You will still not be recognized. Okay, so this is something that we do not want in Singapore. Lastly, the fourth principle will be providing a stake for everyone. Okay, we'll begin the learning of this principle with this example. Let's say Miss Ong were to tell you that next term onwards, term 3, we'll have 2 days of SS supplementary every week. Okay, every Tuesday and Thursday we'll have SS sub. And I tell you this straight in your face, and then when you start to tell me, teacher, cannot lah, very tiring and all that, and I hear none of your concerns, I disregard your comments, your worries, your concerns, how would you feel? Okay, you will feel that Miss Ong so dictatorial. Everything that I say will not be taken into consideration. She just decides whatever she wants to do. She does not care about us at all. Okay, so you will feel that, right? Okay, so this is what we do not want in Singapore. We want to provide a stake for everyone. Stake means a sense of involvement, a sense of ownership. The government wants to provide a sense of ownership and involvement for everyone, okay, to let people know that the government actually cares for their needs. The government hears their concerns, okay, when making policies. So providing a stake for everyone is to make Singaporeans have a greater sense of involvement and ownership, okay, and therefore develop a greater sense of belonging in Singapore, okay, by involving them in the decision-making process. Okay, so stake here does not mean your life is at stake, even though it is the same word stake. But the stake here, we are not talking about your life is at stake, but rather the stake here refers to a sense of involvement, a sense of ownership, a sense of belonging. Okay, so one example is the Our Singapore Conversation, which was started in 2012. Okay, so basically it's a nationwide conversation where the MPs, the ministers, they hold dialogue sessions with Singaporeans to hear about what Singaporeans hope for Singapore to be like in 2030. Okay, what do we want our society to develop into? So these dialogue sessions involve Singaporeans from all walks of life. You can be a taxi driver, you can be a student, you can be a national serviceman, you can be a retiree, you can be a professional. You are involved in this nationwide dialogue that is held in various parts of Singapore. Okay, such as in seminar rooms in NLB, in university university tutorial rooms, okay, in various places in Singapore, we have this nationwide conversation involving MPs, ministers, hearing out the concerns and needs of Singaporeans and what they hope for Singapore to be like many years down the road. Okay, so you can see here on the PowerPoint slides now, Singaporeans, through this Our Singapore Conversation, this nationwide conversation, this dialogue, they share their hopes and dreams for Singapore. They want Singapore to be a society with many definitions of success, not just limited to academic success, for instance. They also want a society with strong families. They also want a Singapore that's affordable to live in with lower cost of living, for instance. So this is what the needs, this is what the Singaporeans have shared about their needs, okay, their aspirations, their hopes for Singapore, so that the government is able to know better the concerns of Singaporeans and therefore come out with policies that are able to meet the needs of Singaporeans. Okay, so this is an example of Our Singapore Conversation, also known as OSC in short, Our Singapore Conversation, OSC. Okay, so this is similar to the kind of dialogue session you have in school, where school leaders, okay, ask you about your opinions and feedback. Something similar to that in school, but it is carried out on a nationwide scale. Okay, so you can see here an example of a session of the OSC in action. The second example we can talk about is the public housing scheme. Okay, this public housing scheme has the aim of letting Singaporeans to be able to buy and own their own homes in Singapore and not just to rent homes or rent houses in Singapore. Okay, so this public housing scheme has the goal of letting Singaporeans feel a sense of ownership and belonging in Singapore by having an owner-occupied home, an owner-owned home. Okay, you are not just simply renting units, renting houses from people, but instead you actually own a physical home in Singapore. And why is this important? Okay, based on the rationale of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew back in 2010, okay, he said this: if you ask people, Singaporeans, to defend all the big houses where the bosses live and they themselves live in harbours, for instance, I don't think that's tenable, that's very sustainable. Why? Okay, so we decided from the very beginning that everybody must have a home. Every family will have something to defend, and that home must be owner owned. But they have to pay by installment over 20, 25, or even 30 years, and that home will develop over the years into their most valuable asset. So this is a very logical thinking because if everyone owns a home in Singapore, okay, it is something that it is a physical asset to you. It is something that you have a stake in. Okay, you are not just simply renting units here and there. You do not have a place that truly belongs to you in Singapore. Okay, so comparing someone who lives in a rented unit and someone who owns a home, that someone who owns a physical home in Singapore will have a greater sense of involvement. Okay, let's say if war were to happen in Singapore, this person is more likely to want to defend whatever they have in Singapore, and that's why they want to defend the country because what they treasure, what they cherish are all in Singapore, correct? Versus someone else who are just staying on temporary basis, they rent units here and there, they do not have a physical asset to defend. Their sense of involvement, their sense of belonging to Singapore will be weaker. Okay, so that's why it is important that through this public housing scheme, people in Singapore are able to afford a house of their own so that it develops a sense of belonging and ownership in them. Okay, so this link is actually to show you in the case of Hong Kong, where land space is very much uh, restricted, limited, okay, and people have to rent apartments that are very, very small. They live in bad living conditions, okay, and comparing, let's say we compare the people living in Hong Kong to the people living in Singapore, people in Hong Kong, they do not have that greater sense of belonging because they do not own a physical home of their own. Instead, they live in rented units, many of them. Okay, and that's why their sense of ownership to their country may not be as strong. Okay.